Hello, this is the last part of this, well, science, last part of the science department section on environmental science. And so for the first session, we're going to cover two different areas. So the first one is life cycle analysis. And then secondly, we'll also look at reasons why waste is generated. So what you need to do is listed here. So explain what a life cycle analysis is. Using an example, evaluate the environmental impact of a product from obtaining its raw materials to disposal. And then there's two economic models that we're going to look at. This is circular and linear, and you need to be able to describe the difference between them, differences. And some more. So explain why globalization of supply chains has increased waste generation and obsolescence. So obsolescence, something becomes obsolete, it's not used anymore. And there's three kinds: technological, planned, and psychological. So to begin with, the life cycle analysis is simply the assessment or the analysis of the environmental impact of a product, and that is from obtaining the raw materials to its disposal. So here's an example here, life cycle analysis, which the company BlackBerry do. So they're saying that they pick up their raw materials are from sustainable sources, and then they have these various stages. So essentially, it's when you buy a product, the life cycle is everything that goes in from when the raw materials are obtained to you not using it anymore. So you're getting to recycling or whether it's been binned. And there's companies to try and I suppose maybe as an advertising opportunity or to try and sell the product now are maybe more aware of the impact in the environment, and so they will release information like the life cycle to show that they are sustainable and working in an environmentally friendly manner. So here's just another way of putting it. So you've got your input, so that's the materials, the energy required, water's going to be required as well. You're also going to have construction, transportation to shops, and then you've got what happens at the end of life. So when you buy a product, when you buy something in the shop, what you've basically got is the very end part. There's an awful lot that's gone in and a lot of materials and energy used to get it to that point. And we've just got to the point where we use it and then consume it, get rid of it, recycle it. So, can you draw this table? So this is LCA, means life cycle analysis of a plastic bottle. So draw that table, press pause, and then come back. So what we've got here is the input and output. So what you put into the plastic bottle, and then down the bottom, what the output is. So I'm gonna show you a wee slide, and then there's a video, and where you're looking at the slide and where you're watching the video, I want you to try and fill it in. I mean, some of this stuff here, I think you could probably do just now, but these will help you. So there's the life cycle of plastic bottle. So have a read of that and fill in what you can. Press pause. And then there's also this video as well, so search for this on YouTube. What really happens to the plastic you throw away? And using that previous slide and using this video, hopefully you'll have filled in your table, and unpause, and I'll show you what I would put in the table. So for the materials, the input, crude oil is used to make the plastic. Something you might not have considered perhaps was for some you might also, some products you'd have a paper label, so that would be wood required for that. In terms of energy, you need to get the oil out of the ground, whether that's in the North Sea or somewhere else. Factories is going to have heat and light. You're also going to need energy to mould the shape. You're going to need energy to take to supermarkets, and also in the recycling process. In terms of fuels, you're going to have fossil fuels potentially. Hard to tell, but yeah, you'd imagine maybe natural gas, oil is going to be used. Could be renewable sources as well. There's an increasing amount of Scotland's electricity is coming from renewable sources. Then in terms of output, the products, So your end product is the plastic bottle, and then the waste. So where does a plastic bottle go? So your options here are landfill, incineration, could be reused within your house maybe, or recycled. And then something, the final one there's you might not have considered either, is the packaging. So if you were the packaging which takes it into supermarkets, or if you buy say a dozen plastic bottles, then there's packaging that comes with that. And then the emissions is going to be greenhouse gases. So you're going to have from the oil rig itself, from the factory processes, and from transport as well. Okay, so that's your life cycle analysis of a plastic bottle. So for life cycle analysis, you then have different kind of economic models related to that. So what you saw with the BlackBerry example was it was kind of circular. So what was being produced, the hope is it be recycled and go back towards being raw materials that could be used again. Now the linear economic model, you can see here, it's kind of summarised as take, make, waste, and the hope is we're beginning to move away from this. So basically this, though, is still the dominant economic model, and as a result of that, you produce vast quantities of waste. So there's not the emphasis on recycling or reusing, and you will lose natural resources as a result of that. Whereas the circular one, what the intention is that the resources are regenerated and it's in a closed loop. So you can see it here as an example. So you've got the design and manufacture goes to the retailer, then to the consumer, and then it's recycled, and then this goes back to the design and manufacture. So clearly this is sustainable, and you would have reduced waste, energy usage, and pollution as well. So in this, you'd want to, if you look at the life cycle of a plastic bottle, you can see if you follow this kind of route here, this is the sort of linear models. You would end up with quite a lot going to the landfill, and yeah, 1,000 years from now, there'll still be plastic bottles kicking about. Whereas if you take it down the recycling route, then that's more of a a circular method, because you can recycle some, about 27% of them will be recycled. Some of it is kind of poor quality plastic, and you can't do much with it. So, but some can be recycled in a circular model. So here's something for you to think about. So write down 3 measures a plastic bottle making company could take to make their processes more sustainable. Okay, so press pause and just think about all of those things that you had in your table and how you could maybe adapt the processes. So possibilities, you could have maybe set up a collection scheme. So the plastic bottles maybe go to a particular location within the supermarket. You see that in supermarkets now in terms of plastic bags. They go to a certain place. What about electric transport vehicles? That would be another option. Electric transport vehicles would not produce greenhouse gases, although you have your own problems in terms of accessing the kind of cobalt and other rare metals for the batteries of the vehicles, but that's something. What about using solar energy to power the factory, or other renewable sources? Or you just encourage consumers to reuse the bottles, or they could make the switch from making single-use plastics. Okay, so quite a wide range of things there in terms of changing the type of energy they use to try and to influencing consumer behaviour as well. Okay, so this here we've got kind of again the sort of long chain of events which happens before a product gets to a consumer, and this as a result of this is what we call a globalized supply chain. So a lot of the things that you buy in a supermarket will come from different locations around the world, and as a result of that, there's an awful lot of, if something is produced in Asia or America, in order for it to get here, that's a large amount of energy. So these globalized supply chains mean lots of waste is produced at many different stages. So that's the kind of producing products, and then one of the things that happens is the product isn't used anymore, and there's different reasons for this. And if it's not used anymore, it becomes obsolete. So technological obsolescence is when goods become, what do you think that might be? Something over time, for example, because technical support is no longer available, so that's unusable. So if you look at this, I had one of these. I think it was a Sony as well. It was all black, mine. Used it for many years. Um, if that dies, then the chances are you're not going to find the parts to fix it. Also, you know, cassette tapes are not, you're not going to. There's not many. I don't know if you can even purchase them now, apart from maybe on eBay. If you think about your phones from um, 5, 6 years ago, would they still be? Could you still use them? Would they be too slow? So that's been an example of technological obsolescence. Things have moved on, and computers technology isn't you aren't able to use it anymore. Planned obsolescence is when you've got a product that has an artificially limited useful life, and that means it will become obsolete after a certain period of time. So the kind of famous example is light bulbs. The more modern light bulbs do tend to last longer, but light bulbs are something which were planned to need to be replaced. Another one, and one which caused, particularly in the circumstances around at the moment, something which does cost a lot of money, is print cartridges. So that's another example of planned obsolescence. You buy something, but you know that you're going to have to replace it, which produces waste. And then the last one is psychological obsolescence. So that is when consumers are persuaded by advertising or something pressure, peer pressure, to update their model of a product to one which is superior in some way. So, for example, that, which we'd like to refer to as a brick, I suppose, um, and people that if you just want to phone people, then that works, doesn't it? If you want to send a text message, if you want to do other things, then it doesn't do the job. But a lot of people, I guess, would not want to be seen to be would not want to be seen to be using that as their phone, and particularly people of a certain age, so they'd want to be seen to be using something a bit more sophisticated. This as well, I mean, that is perfectly good clothing as far as I can see, pretty pricey. But I don't know if it would keep you warm, but there is clothing, I suppose, if you look back at some of the things that you maybe wore when you're a bit younger, that have gone out of fashion, and it's still clothes, isn't it? But it's for some reason society has moved on and decided that that is now obsolete and you can't wear it anymore. So that's psychological obsolescence. Okay, so ABC, technological, planned, psychological. I want you to press pause and match these up as to which type you think they fall into. So, technological obsolescence, Game Boy is the first one. Then a video recorder, might struggle to get parts for either of those if they break. And yeah, the iPhone 1, I don't think is. I think you'd struggle to find somebody who could fix that if it was broken and this, you probably wouldn't be able to run modern software and apps on it. And then planned obsolescence, light bulb we mentioned, also tights as well. Again, I'm not someone who wears tights, but they only last a certain period of time, don't they? It's just the way it is. And phone batteries too, planned obsolescence. And then psychological, shell suit, jelly sandals were very popular, not so much anymore. And also Club Penguin. I don't know if anyone still plays that, but that was popular for a while. And just to finish off this wee section, have a look at this. So this is the story of stuff and kind of goes through those circular and linear models. So to begin with, hello and I'm talking about, um, write down the answers to these. Press pause. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Pause. Write down this revision from last time. So a life cycle analysis, that is the assessment of the environmental impact of a product from obtaining raw materials through to disposal. And then your two models. So linear produces lots of waste and a loss of natural resources, whereas circular is more sustainable, and that ends you regenerate resources that should be in a closed loop. And as a result of regenerating resources, you've got less waste, less use of energy, and less pollution. And then the second one, number 3, press pause again. Name, describe, and give an example of each of the 3 types of obsolescence. So we have planned, so that's when a product has an artificially limited useful life. So it will become obsolete after a certain period of time, like an ink cartridge. Psychological is when consumers have been persuaded or they've decided that whatever the product is, they can't use it anymore, not because it doesn't work, but because it's just not appropriate in society. The society's deemed that. So certain types of mobile phones, certain clothing. Technological, and that is when goods become unusable over time. So because of a lack of technical support or parts, or it just runs too, the modern software runs too slowly on it. The next section is on packaging. So explain why companies use packaging, and also describe ways in which the packaging industry can be more sustainable. So first of all, the purpose of it. So it's to protect products from damage during transport and or when it's being stored, or it could be used for display purposes. For example, those are crisps, I think. General Mills bugles, and yeah, it's waste ultimately. So in order to make the packaging industry more sustainable, then the first thing would be to use less. So I mean, if you look at this, that's just unnecessary, isn't it? I mean, if you buy apples, presumably you're going to wash them before you eat them. So yeah, unnecessary. Another one that you see in supermarkets, I guess, in current circumstances, maybe people are being a bit more um, safe in terms of touching surfaces than they were before. But you can get either broccoli loose, or you can get broccoli wrapped up in plastic packaging. So there's not really any reason to buy the one that's in plastic packaging. Again, you're gonna wash it when you get home. So things like that you will see, just unnecessary packaging. Something else you could do is when you're producing the packaging, to use renewable energy. So when it's being sourced, manufactured, transported, and recycled. The other one is use renewable or recycled source materials. So sometimes now, if you get magazines, they're quite often, they're wrapped in that sort of thin plastic. Sometimes those, you can now put them in the brown bin. They're made from, organic material. So hopefully that's something that we'll see more of, and they'll start to replace plastics that we've been using for years. Also, the production practices could be amended. So you could have an audit at each stage of production. So look at what you can do to make each stage of production more sustainable, use less energy. And then the next bit of this, packaging, I suppose we might not necessarily think about it as packaging, but coffee cups, if you walk along the front, you'll see so many people using one-use coffee cups that they've bought somewhere, and that's a huge source of waste. So I want to have a look at this video, The Truth About Recycling Coffee Cups. And hopefully you've watched the video, and then the next thing, you'll need this for the next task. So there's the website. If you just Google Viewpoint, the waste mountain of coffee cups, and then kind of flick back and forward between that page and the next page, which has got the questions on it. So here are the questions. So press pause and answer those. So number one, how many coffee cups are used in the UK every day? That is 7 million. I mean, that is a mad number, isn't it? 7 million coffee cups are used. And yeah, number two, again, this is one of these things that until I taught this, I wasn't aware of it. But yeah, takeaway coffee cups, you might just think, oh, that can go in the blue bin. You know, I'm not doing anything, not doing any harm to the environment here. But the problem is because of the heat of the coffee, they're lined with a plastic polyethylene, and that can't be recycled at standard paper recycling mills. So basically, these 7 million coffee cups are going into the waste. So every day, so they're having to be incinerated or go to landfill. So, well, maybe not all of them, but here's the percentage that are recycled. So below 1%. So yeah, nearly all of them. So two alternatives to using the current style of coffee cups. So using reusable cups, so are those which can be recycled at standard paper recycling facilities. So when it's something that coffee shops do, isn't it? You can take your own cup and ask them to fill it. Again, and then the last one, why might companies not want to change? Just because it's less profitable. Okay. But yeah, coffee cups is a mountain of waste, 7 million every day. So have a break and then come back another day. So now we're going to have a look at what's called the waste hierarchy, which is this pyramid. And what you've got is the most favoured option at the top and the least favoured at the bottom. But before we get on to that, let's try this from last time. So state at least two ways in which the packaging industry could become more sustainable. So any of these would be suitable. Use less packaging, using renewable energy during the process of producing and then eventually the end of life for the packaging. Again, the source materials could be renewable or recycled, or amends production practices. So we talked about having audits at each stage in production, or maybe the water you're using is grey water, for example, that we talked about before. So it's recycled water. So for this, back to that pyramid, so there are different options in the waste hierarchy. So if you've got, what you can either do is prevent the waste, you can prepare it for reuse, you can recycle it, you can recover the energy and materials, or you can dispose it. And we're going to look as well at recycling, the difference between open loop and closed loop recycling. So this is it, and what it shows is an order of preference for action in reducing and managing waste according to what is best for the environment. So ideally, you don't want to produce any waste at all, and the worst thing is you're just having to bin something. So on a bit of paper or in your jotter, can you draw this quite big, maybe a full page, just copy what is here and then leave space in these kind of gaps to, you're going to write things. So what I want you to do is copy these into the correct sections on your waste hierarchy pyramid. So where exactly do you think they fit in? So these are all kind of examples. So press pause and do that, and then we'll see what you should have. So up the top, prevention and minimisation. So you should have scrapping best before dates, and then restaurant customers taking home their uneaten food. Something apparently, I've never been to America, but apparently it's very common there that you take away, if you don't finish your dinner, then you take it away with you if you're at a restaurant, but it's never really caught on here, has it? Reuse, so would be refurbishing old furniture or taking a bag for life to the shops. I think that's a big change that more people do that compared to a few years ago now that you have to pay for the bags, and also just people being more environmentally aware. Recycling would be mining landfill sites for rare metals. I think we have to expect that the amount of waste that's been produced in the last 50 years or so, this is going to be a big industry in the future, going into mined landfill sites for raw materials, including rare metals. Turning waste into a new product also comes under recycling. For energy recovery, you could have food being digested by microorganisms to produce biogas. Every year, the material that's put in the brown bins, you can go and pick it up at various places and as compost for your garden. So that would be recovering the energy from it or recycling. And then disposal is your two options is just incinerating the waste or sending it to a landfill site. So let's just look at each of the stages. So prevention and minimisation. We talked about coffee cups and how it's difficult to recycle them, but also food waste is a big problem in the UK or all over the world, I suppose. £280 million worth of milk is wasted every year. 10% of the weekly shop is binned. Apparently, the average family could save £50 a month. 50% of the total amount of food thrown away in the UK comes from our homes. So that's a simple thing at the top of the waste hierarchy. So you've got education, just letting people know this. So the environmental effects. So if you didn't waste that, it'd be the equivalent of having 20% less cars on the road. And also, a big thing would be to be aware of if you're just a bit more sensible, how much money could be saved every month. And then simple things here as well. So individuals use up all leftovers. Schools, I think, are pretty good at this. So they only cook what's required. Or you'll know yourselves at the end of lunchtime they'll give away what's left over, and people will swarm around it to pick up free sandwiches and so on. And also, this is something that maybe restaurants could be a little bit more proactive in doing and advertising and allowing customers to take home uneaten food. This too, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the difference between a best before and a use by date. So use by is in terms of safety. So you see it in milk most commonly, and you need to kind of use it by that date. Um, Otherwise, you could potentially become ill. The best before is about quality. So, there may be people who will throw away something if it's the 5th of March and they've got something which is best before the 4th, they might bin it. But actually, it's probably all right, unless it's got mold on it or something. But that would be one thing that could be done, maybe kind of government level, is to scrap best before dates and just have use by dates, and that would reduce waste. Sometimes these as well, you might see these are display until. Those kind of confuse people because that's just for the people that work in the supermarket. So you could potentially get rid of those as well, I suppose. Something else, another way to prevent waste is to use products for longer. So don't necessarily upgrade your mobile phone. Do you need to? Is it still working okay? Could you hang on for another year or two? Also, less material could be used during designing manufactured products. This is something that majority of us won't be aware of, but I guess those who work in these industries might say that there's a lot of waste at certain stages of production which are unnecessary. Also use less hazardous materials as well. So I think this is asbestos, and those working in companies could have a kind of improved quality control, and also we kind of talked about this before, audits and monitoring the processes that are taking place so that there's less waste produced at each stage. So we're not just talking about, it's easy to think of it as just what we do as the consumers, but there's a lot that can be done, in the production of these products as well. And then reuse. So occasionally, or quite regularly, I guess you get these bags through the post, don't you, where you put your old clothes and you can put them out in the street and somebody comes and collects them. So that you can do that. Worth bearing in mind though that they might have to be checked, cleaned, repaired, refurbished. So there might still be a bit of energy used, in doing and having to organise, clothes and clothing banks. Then you've got recycling, and that does include composting as well, so that's your brown bin. So what you're doing is you're turning the waste into a new surplus of products, but good. But also bear in mind it's not just you're still having to, it's still not as good as not having the waste at all, because it does require energy. You've got the bin lorry coming to pick it up for collection, transport it, it's got to be reprocessed. So I guess some people think, oh, it's okay, but I'll have this because it can be recycled, but there's still energy, fossil fuels being burned in order to recycle. This is maybe a wee bit out of date, but there's the recycling rates in Europe. So some countries are better than others. We're up there, but Germany is quite far ahead. So focusing on recycling, closed loop recycling, this all looks a bit like the circular economic model again, and it's the same kind of idea. So the product can be recycled indefinitely back into itself. So it can be you can completely recycle it. And as a result of that, few inputs, which means you're not requiring more water, more energy, more raw materials, and you don't get as much waste. So a good example of this is aluminium. So aluminium is taken from the ore bauxite, and if you recycle it, then it's just all you need is 5% of the energy, which was initially required to get it from the ground. So there's less waste, resource depletion, and anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions in being able to get aluminium recycled. Open loop recycling, so you can see here you have still got this loop, so the material is still being recycled, but what you can see is you've still got some waste being produced and you've still got raw materials required. So what can happen with this is, first of all, you can say that there's loss of quality. So within the recycling cycle, every time it happens, you're going to get a product which isn't as good, lesser quality plastic, for example. So it means that the material can be recycled a limited number of times. And as I said, you'll need fresh raw materials, and it also produces waste. So closed loop recycling is preferable. So here's kind of various different plastics, and every time plastic is reprocessed, it becomes a lower grade product. And eventually it's going to get to the point where some plastics, they just, they can't be recycled and they will become waste. And you'll see, if you look at on plastic products, they'll usually have this number and they'll tell you which particular type of plastic it is. And here we go here. So there's your sort of 1 to 7 different types of plastic which can be used, and some are of higher quality than others. So moving further down, so we're getting to the sort of least favoured options, is you can recover energy from waste. So we looked at this, didn't we, for sewage treatment. So if you've got organic waste like food, you can use microorganisms to carry out anaerobic digestion. It just means they're basically digesting the food in the absence of oxygen, and you get methane and carbon dioxide produced. Problems though, what's methane and carbon dioxide? They're both greenhouse gases, so they can be used, but again, it's, you're producing something which is harmful to the environment. And recovery of materials from waste. So this is something that, this is in some developing countries, this is their lives. They'll wait until the bin lorries come in, and then they'll scavenge around it and see what they can get to be something that they can use directly or reuse or kind of clean up and sell. So yeah, it's common for people in some countries to collect useful materials from landfill sites. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, you might have in the future, depending on which resources are available, you might have landfills that are being mined in order to get rare metals, for example, picking out from old mobile phones. And then this is the worst. So this is what you're left with when you get to the bottom. So just disposing. So you get landfill. So it could be collected, reused, or recycled if that was organised. But it's unsightly. I mean, who wants to live beside a landfill site? You're also using land. The ones in the UK, I think, or certainly the modern ones, are designed in such a way that the waste within it doesn't leak into the surrounding area, but you do have the possibility that it could contaminate groundwater. And then the other way of disposing is through incineration. So incineration, obviously, if you it was just going to reduce the mass of waste, but again, you're producing greenhouse gases as that occurs, and you might have toxic substances produced too. So best avoided. So to begin with, here's our waste hierarchy again. So we can draw that again, please, on a fresh bit of paper. And what I'd like to do is just go through each of the stages in that and just give an example of what it means. Okay, so each of the stages, prevention, minimisation, and so on, and then I'll just flick back through these and you can check if you can remember it. So this is prevention and minimisation. So just telling people how much they could save if they didn't waste. Here's some other ways in which you could prevent or minimise waste. Scrapping best before dates. You might have also had this, so using products for longer, not being so quick to upgrade when you're maybe get that email saying you can upgrade now. Also looking at design, manufacturing. And then the recycling, so the kind of the positives of it, but also you should have mentioned in that bit that it does also require energy. You could have also mentioned in the recycling section about how you've got the difference between the closed loop recycling, which doesn't require a lot of new resources and doesn't produce waste. Whereas your open loop recycling does require new inputs and will produce waste. So that section there, so recovery of materials, you could have said, talked about people picking up materials at landfill sites, or recovery of energy by producing biogas for organic material. And then finally it was disposal, so you're talking about landfill or incineration. Okay, so that was just again another little summary of that to try and get you to be able to describe what's happening at each stage. Okay, and then the last section of this is just the impact of waste on the environment. So you want to be able to describe the effect of waste on air and water quality, the landscape, marine environments, biodiversity, and climate change. So this is a little research task, so just spend maybe 20 minutes or so and just use the internet and give examples how waste affects air quality, water quality, the landscape, marine environments, biodiversity and climate change. Press pause and then come back and I'll show you some of the things you could have talked about. So for air quality, some we talked about before, so if you incinerate waste then that can produce toxic substances, that would be an example. In terms of water quality, you could have chemicals which could alter the pH, so you might also say about landfill sites contaminating groundwater for that one. and groundwater in some places around the world is used for people to drink. For landscape, you just say if you have to have a landfill site or if people are dumping rubbish, then it spoils the look of it. And then the marine environment, so you could talk about the harm to animals. So waste plastics could be ingested by seabirds. You could also have talked about bioaccumulation with your pesticides, and that's waste from the agricultural industry, I suppose. And then biodiversity, so in order to accommodate our need to produce new products and then eventually get rid of the waste it produces, then you might have to clear ecosystems, for example, a forest habitat to build an incinerator or to have a landfill site, and that would have a negative effect on biodiversity. And in terms of climate change, you can relate that back. So decomposing food waste, that enhances the greenhouse effect. You're going to have methane, carbon dioxide produced, which are greenhouse gases. So just to finish off, let's just do a bit of a summary of the waste and water stuff. So these are all mixed up words, and I want you to unscramble them and then use the word in a sentence at an appropriate level for this. So press pause and do that. So the first one is black water, 2 is flock, 3 is sewage, boo steel is obsolete, carry curl is circular, prid eroding is drip irrigation, fleet fun is effluent, iced foisting is disinfection, and then nasal addition is desalination, and cringines is screening. So if you haven't already got a sentence related to each one, do that just now. And for black water, so you would just say black water is the water which leaves houses through toilets, and you could say it's then treated. Flock is a product which is produced during the water treatment process. You could mention that. For sewage, you could talk about there being the 4 stages of the sewage treatment process. You could also bring screening into that. So screening is the first stage to remove large objects. 4, obsolete, so that is when a product becomes, you don't use it anymore, and you could mention here the psychological, planned and technological obsolescence. Circular, so for this you could have talked about the circular economic model, and you could have said that this results in less waste being produced. Drip irrigation is a method of reducing the amount of water used during agriculture. So that's when you just have water dripping onto the roots of the plant. Effluent is produced during the sewage treatment process. Disinfection, that is the last stage of the water treatment process, and you could say that in developing countries it could be sodas, whereas in developed countries it may be adding chlorine to the water. Desalination is a method of producing water for people to drink in countries where they might have low rainfall, so they take seawater and remove the salt from it. And screening, we mentioned before, so that is the first stage of both the sewage treatment process and the water treatment process.